Okay, still dealing with the foundations of American government, we move on to lesson 2, which deals with the Articles of Confederation. And so as we ended last lecture dealing with the independence, we saw that the American colonists, or the British colonists, had moved towards eliminating themselves from the British Empire and creating their own republic by essentially telling the British Crown that they had declared their independence. And so in order to create their own government, they will need a framework for that government. And so the framework for our government was the Articles of Confederation, and this is going to essentially be our first constitution. And so our learning objectives, our course learning objectives, are describe the steps taken during and after the American Revolution to create a government, identify the main features of the Articles of Confederation, and describe the crises resulting from the key features of the Articles of Confederation. And our departmental learning outcomes explain the origin and development of the constitutional democracy in the United States of America. So by the time the lecture is over, it is my hope that you will be able to answer the following essential questions. What were the Articles of Confederation, and what were the deficiencies that led to the collapse of the Articles of Confederation? So when the Declaration of Independence is signed, the colonies are essentially a sovereign nation, and they are going to need a sovereign government. And the Second Continental Congress is going to set about creating this government, but they do encounter a number of different problems. One problem is that the colonies often distrust one another. The colonies are extremely varied. They're spread throughout along the eastern coast of modern-day United States, and they stretch from the very top to the very bottom of that seaboard. And because of the differences in location and geography and things like that, there's going to be some significant differences of the colonies, and you're going to have the very agricultural type of colonies in the south and the more industrial, commercial style of colony in the north, and so they're not really going to be trustful of one another because they don't all have the same interests, and they want to make sure their interests are represented. There was a need for a unified nation capable of borrowing money and negotiating treaties because as a new nation, the American colonies are going to need money, and they're also going to need to be recognized by foreign nations, and in order to do so, they will need to negotiate treaties. And so a unified nation is going to be important for that, but again, the colonies distrust one another. So that leads us to the sought recognition of foreign governments. They want foreign governments to recognize them because when they when they have recognitions from a foreign government, then they're more legitimate, and people will start taking them, a little more seriously. Plus, they're fighting a war, and they need to seem united, and they need to seem competent as a sovereign government, so that people will take them seriously. And so in November of 1777, the Articles of Confederation are going to be created and accepted by Congress, and they are going to send these to the states for ratification. And according to the Articles of Confederation, there needs to be a unanimous vote in order for them to take effect. And so that means all 13 colonies are going to need to vote in favor. But remember, we have colonies that don't necessarily trust one another, that do not sometimes like one another, and so it's going to be complicated to get all 13 to vote in favor. And in fact, after 2 years, all but Maryland had ratified. So there had been 12, but there was one holdout. Maryland was holding out because they wanted to relinquish, Maryland wanted states to relinquish control of land west of the Appalachians. So some states had started to make claims on the land west of the Appalachian Mountains, and Maryland didn't like that. They wanted that to be sort of set up as on a more level playing field. And so finally all states agreed to do this, and Virginia is the last one to do it in 1781. And at this point, Maryland will ratify the Articles of Confederation. And so in 1781, a few months after these articles are ratified by the colonies, the British are going to surrender, and the American colonies essentially have won their independence. And so they do have this new government, and many people wished for a republic. And a republic is a government in which people, instead of a monarchy, hold power and elected representatives are governed according to the rule of law. Many feared, however, that a republic would not be able to rule a country or a state the size of the former colonies, because remember, they do stretch from up north all the way down to the southern portions of the eastern seaboard. And so they feared that because of the sheer size of the colonies, a republic wouldn't be able to necessarily successfully represent this region. They also feared that even elected representatives would become too powerful and overbearing. And so instead of a republic being created under these Articles of Confederation, we have a confederation. And a confederation is an entity in which independent, self-governing states form a union for the purpose of acting together in areas of defense, in areas such as defense. And so we don't have a united group of colonies that come together. They are not the United States of America. They are 13 different colonies that essentially run their own affairs within their borders in their own way, and they come together for certain things like defense. But there is no real unity. They are a loose alliance of essentially independent countries, of independent governments running their affairs as they see fit. And so this is done because they do fear an oppressive national government. And because of this, the framers do create a loose alliance of sovereign states. And the central government is going to be extremely weak. They do not want to fall back into the old trap of what they just fought their way out of. And so you have a loose conglomeration of independent states running their own affairs. Each state had already drafted their own constitutions, and in doing so, they had already provided for a republican form of government where the power rested with the people. And so they wanted to maintain that republican form of government within their own boundaries. But there are going to be some significant deviations from the type of Republican form of government we know and the type of Republican form of government instituted in a lot of these state constitutions, because the right to vote is not going to be universal, obviously. It is going to be limited to free white property-owning men. And while the requirement for property owning did vary amongst the states, it is going to be very common in the state constitution. Each state already had its own governor and elected legislature, so there didn't really seem to be a need for a very powerful one of these at the national level, and each state remained free to govern themselves as they saw fit. They are going to coin their own money, and they're going to regulate their own trade, and they're going to participate in the national government when they feel like it is within their best interest. But we're not going to see unity. There's a severe lack of unity in this new government. So if we look at the central government in the Articles of Confederation, we see that they had power to act in only a few areas, and these areas included national defense. The Confederation Congress, which was formerly known as the Continental Congress, did have the authority to exchange ambassadors with other nations. They did have the authority to make treaties with foreign nations and native tribes. They did have the power to declare war. They could coin currency. They could borrow money, and they could settle disputes between the states. But there were some significant deficiencies within this constitution as well, this national government as well. At the national legislature level, each state will appoint a delegate or a group of delegates to the Congress, but they could be recalled at any time. Regardless of size or number of delegates that was sent to the legislature, only one vote was cast by each state. So each state only had one vote. Delegates could not serve more than 3 consecutive terms. So there was this idea of term limitation in regards to delegates. There was no chief executive or judiciary. There was simply a legislature. And so there was really no one to act on behalf of the nation. There was no court system in place. Each state had their own court system, but there was no national court system to sort of moderate things. And 9 votes were required for action by the civil government. So each state had 1 vote. So this means 9 states had to agree that action should be taken by the central government before the central government could act. And then if you wanted to change any provision within the Articles of Confederation, it had to be done by unanimous approval of all 13 states. And it was very, very complicated to get all 13 states on the same page. And so this is going to lead to a number of deficiencies. It is going to create a central government way, way too weak to function effectively. People are, or the government is not going to have the ability to act in the interests of the people in the Americas. They did not have any power to tax. The Articles of Confederation left this up to the states. The states had the ability to tax their citizens, but the national legislature did not. And in order for a government to run and to work properly, they need money. And so if they have no way to tax, then they're left with essentially panhandling to the states and asking for money from the states. So the national government is going to have to request money from the individual states in the event that they want to act on something or they need to pay for something. The states, however, are not necessarily going to pay that much attention to these requests. Officially, states are required to provide funds in proportion to the value of the land within their borders. So the larger states are going to have to pay more, where the smaller states are going to have to pay less. But by and large, the states are very negligent in providing funds to the national government, and so we have a perpetually underfunded national government who is really neutered in their ability to do anything, because doing something requires money. And so we're going to see that the national government cannot pay their debts that they incurred during the American Revolution. They could not effectively conduct foreign affairs. And we have a very, very deficient federal government. All the power was essentially within the hands of each individual state. And so as a result, we're going to see a significantly crippled economy. The Articles of Confederation had given the national government the ability to coin their own money, which incidentally became known as the Continental, but they had also not prohibited the states from coining their own money. And so each individual state is going to issue their own currency. And so as a result, currency is largely going to be worthless because people are going to be reluctant to use unfamiliar money. It'd be like all 50 of our states having their own money. And every time you cross a party line, or excuse me, a state line, you're going to have to essentially exchange your currency and use a currency that is unfamiliar. Well, people are not going to really like this. It's going to really inhibit internet or interstate commerce, and so it's going to have a significant effect on the economy. The central government also lacked the ability to impose tariffs on foreign imports or to regulate interstate commerce, and so they're unable to prevent British merchants from flooding the United States market with low-priced goods. And what this is going to do is it's going to cause American producers to suffer from this competition, right? They cannot level the playing field of a more commercially successful country like Britain with this new fledgling country in the American colonies. And so they are going to be at the mercy of essentially the market, and the American producers are going to suffer significantly as a result. States are going to compound these issues by imposing tariffs on other states' goods. So not only do you have the market being flooded with British goods, British merchant goods, sort of unchecked by the national government, states are going to want their individuals in their states to purchase things from them, and so they're going to impose tariffs on any imports from their neighbors, their own state neighbors. There also going to be a severe lack of power to raise an army or a navy. And so the central government has the ability to declare a war and negotiate peace, but it had to depend on the states to provide soldiers. If they needed soldiers, then they would have to request them, very much like money, they would have to request them from the states. And state governors didn't always honor the national government's request. And so the country is going to lack an adequate defense, which is extremely dangerous when you're a brand new fledgling nation and there's some other European powers on the prowl in the New World, in North America and in South America. And so, you know, they had just won a war against England, but England is still a significant presence in North America. And Spain is also a significant player in North America. France is there as well. And so the new nation is going to be extremely vulnerable to some outside invasion. And they have no way of defending themselves because the national government has no ability to raise an army or a navy. And so all of this is going to sort of culminate with what we know as Shays' Rebellion. And Shays' Rebellion is an uprising of farmers in Massachusetts led by an individual named Daniel Shay. These individuals were farmers who had fought during the Revolutionary War and had been promised that they would not be responsible for the taxes on their farms while they were fighting in the war effort. But because of the crippled economy and the inability of the national government to really do anything, these people are going to start being targeted, and their farms are going to be foreclosed upon because of back taxes. And so the individuals are going to rise up, and they are going to lead a revolt, and it's going to panic the governor of Massachusetts. And so who's the first person or first entity he goes to and asks for help from? The national government, which the states, the individual states, or collectively the 13 states, had really worked to ensure was not a very strong entity. And so he asks for help from the national government, but the national government has no troops to send. It does not have any money. It does not have an army. It cannot protect the states from even internal revolts, so let alone anything that comes from a foreign country or outside the nation. And so after several months, the local militia as well as privately funded armies are going to put down the rebellion. There is no national military that comes in to sort of put down the rebellion. The wealthy people are going to have to start hiring some personal armies, and they're going to put down the rebellion. And this is going to rattle the rich people. It's the poor people that are rebelling, and the government has an inability to do anything about it. And so they're having to protect themselves. And apparently, you know, this is not going to be something that they can rely on the national government to help them with. And so it's going to really rattle the rich people. And so there's going to be some other events that are similarly occurring in neighboring states. So while Shays' Rebellion is very famous in Massachusetts, there's going to be some other states that are incurring these revolts from within as well. And so there is going to be a call for a revision to the Articles of Confederation in regards to national security. And also, as another avenue, there are going to be some representatives from a couple of different states, including George Washington, that are trying to get together to determine some kind of policy that can regulate interstate commerce between different states, Maryland, Virginia, etc. And because the national government does not have the ability to regulate interstate commerce, they're trying to hammer things out, and they realize this is really a power that the federal government or the national government needs. And so while it is going to be a national security issue that finally calls for a revision to the Articles of Confederation, commerce is going to play a role as well. And so when we get to our next lecture, we're going to talk about the foundation of our Constitution and the development of the Constitution and all the disagreements and the compromising that had to be done. And so I will leave this here, and I'll see you next time.